Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 131 of the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. I've recorded a lot of episodes in a very short period of time because I've had a lot of great people available to me. And this one, we had to reschedule, but we made it work. Big guest, my pal, Ebenezer Samuel. Eb, you often go by Eb, so we'll probably say Eb from here on out, but it's Ebenezer. And you're the director of, fitness director of Men's Health Magazine, which is a pretty prominent position in this space. And you obviously had me write for you at one point. So of course that was very cool. That was really appreciated. It was great to have you on the show. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. You said 101 episodes,
So 131 plus
131.
I sometimes, like last episode, I pointed out that it's actually 281 because there's 150 episodes of the old format with my old co-host on the same stream. So
Mhm.
I've had the bloody who's who of the fitness industry on here. 5.5 years of doing this. So I keep saying at some point or other, I'm just going to like merge the number again. I might do that at 301. We'll see. But
Mhm.
I've been doing it a while and I love it. So, but
Yes.
little bit of background for people. So you and I actually met in person at Kenny Santucci's Strong New York. That was in Manhattan in, God, what was it? September of last year, anyway. I
Yeah.
met you and my recent guest, David Thomas Tao, same time. And it was great to meet you guys there. And one of the things that stood out to me was you were wearing a cast at the time. you were you were injured, right? So like shaking your hand was a little tricky. And I myself sustained sort of an injury. Like my shoulder's been an issue for a while. It's developed into something that's kind of a little bit more nerve related,
Mm.
neurological. See, my physios are smart guys, don't have something clear on it. So I have to navigate around it. And you create a lot of content, a lot of stuff through your media for the end user, your role with Men's Health. And I thought this was a really good way to think about it. It's like it's a, how did you navigate the identity of being this like strong, fit, active person while dealing with an injury, especially if the coaches in our space, we deal with our own injuries. Sometimes it can be very emotionally challenging, though we're supposed to be superhuman and resilient. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, that heck, way to ask the hard-hitting question first. It was interesting. So for the record, my injury too was basically like an ulnar nerve entrapment, but it was an ulnar nerve entrapment happens, it happens often to especially to baseball players. A lot of times it can be corrected relatively easy. Sometimes it corrects itself. In my case, the structure of my elbow is not does not really permit that. It's funny because I actually have a somewhat similar situation going on the other side, although it's very asymptomatic. And partly because I have to do the whole men's health thing, and because I feel like my career's been going the way I wanted it to. So I've been dealing with this for a good many years. Hadn't really thought about it, hadn't had time to think about it, was just training through it. And it's wild because I feel like we might have talked about this at Kenny's event when I don't know how long. I mean, those things get nuts. Um but it's wild because for a long time when you train and you get to a point where you have injuries and you feel like you can get over anything, and it's always a muscle, and it's a muscle pull, so you're just going to train around it, you're going to train through it, etc. And for years I was literally training through it, right? And I kept assuming it was going to get better, and my grip would weaken on deadlifts because basically the lack of signal going from my ulnar nerve from my elbow to my individual fingers was gradually weakening. And so my pinky was what I wouldn't couldn't grip as aggressively through my pinky, right? I couldn't grip as aggressively through my index finger. um and because of that, I was gradually essentially just doing a deadlift with three fingers, or picking up all my weights, whether it was a deadlift or a row, or getting set up for a bench press with my middle finger, my ring finger, and my thumb, and that was it. And my false grip, or not my false grip, my hook grip was just those fingers, right?
Hmm.
But to me, my answer and my solution to everything, because I'm a trainer and because I should know everything, and because you can always figure it out, was I'm just gonna train my grip harder, and eventually it's gonna get stronger, and eventually it'll work. What was happening, and this is kind of crazy, and this is where I kind of realized I needed to do something about this. Probably about maybe only like a month, maybe 2 months before Kenny's thing. I was actually supposed to speak at Kenny's thing too, and I didn't because of this. Um, but I was at my wedding anniversary. It was our wedding anniversary. We're out to dinner, and I actually my hands was so weak, and the fingers on it wouldn't work the way like doing things like essentially spreading my hand out. I couldn't do this, and I'm still a little weak with it to be honest now compared to like this. You know, my fingers are a lot smarter on the left side, but I couldn't dig my hand into my back jeans pocket to take my wallet out. I had to reach around. I couldn't use my right hand to do that. I'm also right-handed, so that's a little nutty. But I couldn't use my right hand to dig into my back pocket to take my wallet out. So I needed to reach around with my left hand, and I also couldn't put my wallet back in my pocket. And so that's when I started thinking I was very troubled by this. I had been having trouble doing other little things too, but again, it's always trained through it. But I was really troubled by that. Didn't even say a thing to my wife at the time because that's a real bummer of a way to ruin anniversary night. And kind of, but after that, I told her I think 2 days later and started seeing some doctors. Um, and it's crazy because from a personal standpoint, when you're navigating that as a trainer, you feel like you're supposed to be this bulletproof, and everybody looks at you as bulletproof. And eventually that goes to your head, especially as trainers on social media, in my case, I have a certain amount of content that I need to produce. And on some level, yes, it's like if things happen, if you get sick or whatever, you can back down on content a little bit. But there's also an expectation. This is my job for, men's health. And so I'm going to produce a certain amount of videos. And then all of a sudden, you question your job security a little bit. I can't imagine what it's like to be a pro athlete in that situation. It's like they must do the same thing too. But you question your job security a little bit, and you also question, or in my case, I also question for a moment, do I have a right to tell anybody else
Mm.
this is good for their fitness if I can't take care of my own business? Um, Cat?
Sorry, my cat Ozzy interrupted. He actually, before we got on air, he was sitting behind the laptop trying to hack up a hairball. He does this sort of thing for attention sometimes. So, audio listeners, you guys can't see him, but he's always on my social media. So, but please continue.
But yeah, it's hard to train a black cat of all things too. But it's funny because I definitely felt like I'd been around a black cat. I felt very, very unlucky, very frustrated too. Um, and yeah, questioning whether should I be making content for people. How much should I be telling about my fitness if I can't really take care of myself? It actually helped to go see the doctors because we wound up there was definitely a little bit, it wasn't a muscle thing. Muscles are what we as trainers know. Nerves are a complete different thing. Um, and so it helped to initially the doctors, we couldn't quite figure out what it was. We had a hunch it was something related to the ulnar nerve. But again, we didn't realize the severity of it. When I went for the EMG, if you've ever had an EMG test, it's nuts. They literally electrocute you in different positions in order to see how signal is traveling, the speed at which and the aggression or the power at which signal travels across nerves. And it can be tricky because if you electrocute the wrong spot, you're just innervating a muscle. And so they have to get it through the nerve. So it takes a little bit of getting used to. But when we had that test, that's when we kind of discovered basically I had this very large compression in my elbow, and that was creating the problem. We did some other tests. We discovered again that it was in both elbows, which again made me feel a little bit better, right? I could then blame my parents for everything because obviously it's genetic. It's something again that I had to still figure out. And then I think from there, once I kind of made peace with the fact that I'm not broken, because I think that's what the hardest part is. Like I've also had a left labrum surgery for my ACL playing basketball. The ACL playing basketball is somebody else's fault. Makes you feel better, right? Somebody crashed into me. It's a cool story to tell. The left labrum, that was another situation where I felt kind of broken. That was me doing too many muscle ups in my CrossFit stage and doing
Hmm.
too many really, really sloppy muscle ups. And I had to take responsibility for that. But when the injuries happen and you kind of feel like it's your fault, you feel broken for a moment. And there's also a level of, I think, invulnerability that we as trainers and we as people who train hard require, right? Like I can't, if I don't trust my body to perform, I'm not going to be able to hop under a 300-pound bench press or a 400-pound squat or anything. And that trust is something that's always kind of fascinated me. And that trust is something that I knew was going to need to be rebuilt in myself. But it helped because, again, I could write this one off as something a little bit genetic. Once I made peace with that, it became a question of the best way to make content. I can't hide it, right? I mean, I try to hide the scar a little bit, but you can't hide the big cast. But what it is, all the workouts I've done have shown me to be a cyborg, and a lot of people aren't that. So it almost helps to show people because everybody's coming back from an injury on some level. And I think what I tried to make peace with was I can show people how to train through injuries with this, how the rehab process can go, and also how the rehab process can be a little bit quicker than you might think, especially when we're measuring things in a fitness way, right? Like when we measure, Adrian Peterson coming back from an ACL, or, Clayton Kershaw coming back from, a UCL tear, or any pitcher coming back from Tommy John, it's going to be like a 9, 10, 11, 12 month process. And the only thing we see is we see the athlete go down on our fantasy sports, on our fantasy sports, and then we see them come back 12 months later. But along the way, they're going from, bench pressing 20 pounds to 60 pounds to 120 pounds to getting right back to their max when they hit the field again. And that adjustment isn't something that we realize when we're coming back from injuries. And so I think what I was hoping to do with my content around that period was show people, as soon as the injury happens, like the right next day, I wasn't necessarily training hard. I wasn't going to bench press for a while, but I was going to do something. I was going to try to move. And gradually that movement was going to get back to, now I'm 99%. There's a couple things I still can't hit, but gradually it was going to come back as long as I applied myself and was consistent at chipping away at rehab.
There's so much here. As I alluded to with mine, it definitely appears to be some sort of nerve issue that runs up into my cervical spine. I'm currently trying to figure some stuff out with it. There's also probably a shoulder injury that predates it by a few years. And I noticed the same thing. I was very weak in, like, say, an overhead tricep extension motion, very, very weak compared to the other side. And you just try to do what you can. And of course, I've also coached a lot of people who, one of my old clients, fully ruptured bicep tear, had to have surgery, broken ankles, broken wrists. You're coached long enough, you're going to deal with this stuff. And then I really got into the research on what we call cross education. So I actually have a very extensive research-based piece that still remains unpublished. It's in the wings with something I'm hoping to eventually get it done. It's very detailed with programs for upper body and lower body. If you deal with this stuff as coaches, if someone is really interested, message me. I'll send you an advanced copy. Like, I'm cool with that. I'm waiting to have it, like I said, like formally published. But then you're right. You can develop so much expertise dealing with the stuff. And then at least knowing what I was dealing with this arm, what I would do is I would go to the gym. And if on a particular day I just didn't feel great, more recently, because something more acute happened with my forearm, I thought I actually partially tore my bicep. Doesn't look like that was the case. And so sometimes you can go lighter on the injured side, or you can actually give it a break. You can train heavy and hard on the other side, and you're preserving the habit. You're preserving the emotional health benefits and the physiological health benefits of the exercise. And you will get cross education, and it's sort of a nervous system thing that's not fully understood, but it helps to spare the muscle thickness and the strength of the injured limb. And especially if you end up in a cast for a period of time, you don't have this thing where you end up with a shriveled, atrophied arm and one big Popeye limb. It doesn't work that way. So it's a very valuable tool. Like I said, I have more resources on it. And the other part of this, again, it's that identity of being superhuman. We have tons of people in our industry. Our friend Lee Boyce, double knee replacement, right? I mean, that's a big deal for a guy in his early 30s. How many other people, Lane Norton, very prominently, a back injury. Jeff Nippert has dealt with back injuries. There are so many. Joe DeFranco and a shoulder surgery, right? He's a legend in the space. So it's not necessarily uncommon. And I mean, injuries are very common with athletes, and oftentimes fitness professionals, we engage in fitness at a very high level. A lot are competitive. So there's no reason to feel ashamed if you along the way sustain an injury. And I agree with you. I think there's just such a reservoir of content that can come from that, and it can be very relatable to the end user. Now, pivot into the fact that you've also been a writer for a long time. And as I mentioned, fitness director for Men's Health. And you've written for other publications. You were a sports writer before that, hence the sports references. So I think for a long time, I certainly think this way, before social media really blew up, fitness writing was really the path to greater authority in the industry. I always highlight T Nation as being like all of the legacy T Nation people. they're well known in the industry, right? And that's how they got started. How important is writing now with the rise of social media, do you feel?
That's a loaded question.
Fun.
And it's a that's a hard question too. I think you have to consider this from a couple standpoints. I think obviously it's proven right now, and the data is going to tell us that you don't need to write very well or very often or at all to build your brand because, and we see that on social media with just the amount of trainers or wannabe trainers, because we'll include those in there because some people do respect those people who have become fitness experts, quote unquote, based solely on their social media. So in that regard, it is less important because there are other ways that we can convey our message, particularly through social media, through YouTube as well. Um, it's also kind of it's still a very, very valuable tool. And if you want to convey a more advanced message and you want to be more salient in terms of and to be honest, you want to collect your thoughts, I think it's still very, very important, right? And I think it moves you to another level when you can write and when you have done fitness writing. And I think you see that because very, very often my inbox in or my DMs on Instagram are basically a train wreck filled with people regular, all these kind of wannabe trainers who want to write for Men's Health. And we're not gonna just hand our platform away like that. We want to work with people like you and Don Saladino, and and Jeff Cavalier, people, and Kenny, people who have certifications and have proven it, and have knowledge and also have experience because I think, have like I think the fact that you guys like you, Lee Boyce, David Ote, have all dealt with injuries, it makes you better trainers. It leads to a greater understanding of mechanics, especially at whatever area you've been injured at. And you're not going to get that with some of these other social media trainers. So I think writing is still it's also another level, right? Like anybody can do it. Anybody, whether you know what you're talking about or not, you can put together a TikTok of your three favorite biceps exercises. The difference between Andrew Coates' TikTok and somebody else's is going to be yours. Comes with actual knowledge, and the difference is when you go to write that, you can when you go to write that, it's going to be fully fleshed out and it can be challenged and it can survive and stand up to challenges. I think what you see too often right now is when we have when we have this world of social media and social media fitness is everything, you put out 30 seconds and very often there are a lot of flaws in that 30-second video. um but people just kind of watch it, they move on, they don't really always think about it, they aren't going to be mentally positioned to challenge it the moment something is on paper, right? The moment your three favorite biceps exercises are on paper and you have to justify them and you have to write out that justification for this is why my these three exercises work, this is how you do them, this is when I wouldn't do them. Suddenly you've put something on paper that people can look at and read again, and then they're going to challenge it, and then if there are flaws, those flaws will manifest. So writing is a higher bar in the fitness world. I think it'll always be that higher bar. It's not as required to make a name for yourself. But if you truly want to, and to be honest, this may be how it's been since the beginning of time when we think Socrates, Aristotle, all our great philosophers, it's all recorded, right? And it's all recorded in the written word. And I think that matters. That has always mattered and it will always matter on some level, even if we're, you know, very infatuated by TikTok and Instagram or whatever comes next.
So I wanted to really zero in on the fact that like people are in your DMs because that doesn't shock me at all. My attitude for everybody is if you're going to ask for something, what you're asking for better be like deliver on such a give that it's a no-brainer for the person on the other side. So yeah, you as a brand new coach, you think, oh, I have great content, I have a great story. Can I come on your podcast? It's like, no, because the only person, I'll give another example. Now I'm rebooting my event in October, and I had a lot of people. There are people I know really well who said, hey, if you need a speaker, I'm available. I'm like, hey, great, good to know. I probably am covered, but thank you. But there's a whole bunch of people that I don't have much of a relationship with, or they message me, and it's very apparent that the only person that it would benefit is them. And in the case of the publication, you have limited space, resources to feature people. Anybody who hosts a podcast has limited time and ability to have guests on. And if you have an event, you have a limited number of speakers and a budget to fly people in. And so every spot has to be someone who brings eyes, attention, and support to the brand. That's just how it works. So when I'm picking speakers, I really do have to maximize on, putting butts in seats. And a lot of the people who, some of the people who message me who are like, hey, can I come speak at your event? No, you're the person who needs to be butt in the seat with everybody else to benefit from that event. And it doesn't benefit the event to have you speaking because you haven't done the work yet to put yourself in a position. And I'm a big believer in, and I think this is not necessarily everybody's advice, but I wait to be asked for virtually everything. But I'm willing to put myself in a position to get asked because, how Men's Health came about. I've got Don Saladino, who's a good friend, on my podcast. We're chatting about some of his stuff. And then Don has just become a great friend. And Don fights me. He's like, hey, man, how can I help you? How can I? And I'm like, Don, it's okay. Like, I just like supporting people. It's all good. He's like, no, how can I help you? And it's like, well, it's word for word. One of my goals is to one day write for Men's Health. I've already written for Muscle Fitness, T Nation, Ongoing, bunch of other things. And I said, he's like, done, boom. And he like fires off an email to you and Brett that moment. And then that got the ball rolling. And an introduction from Don like that does not come lightly. He's not going to do that for everybody. But what happens? Sure enough, it starts the ball rolling. And then next thing you know, I'm published in Men's Health, which I also big hit. If you ever get this opportunity, guys, keep your mouth shut until the thing is printed, because it's happened to me before where I'm comfortable saying this one. If you Google my name and bodybuilding.com, you will find a contributor page, but no article. I was paid for this article, but just before the editor, who is a great guy, could publish it, the publication was sold. He left. He made sure I was paid, but the article didn't get published. So I do not wave around on my media that I officially wrote for bodybuilding because the article just simply never met the light of day. And that has happened to me a couple times. It happens. But either way, that's a side note. And I really believe that writing is a differentiator. If you are someone who's writing your own blog, you're a skilled writer, if you're writing for any of these publications, there's a lot of people who do social media very well. And I see my social media growth as a byproduct of these other things. But when someone sees that Twitter post that says something clever, and then they click through, and then like social media is all you got versus the person that's like, oh shit, this person writes for all these things. Oh, they've got a YouTube channel. Oh shit, they've got a podcast. Those long form resources are the differentiators that I think you can really build a brand around. And you're missing a lot of opportunity to add value to your audience and to capture the value for yourself if you don't have vehicles that can go deeper with people.
I'll totally agree with that. I think another thing, and it piggybacks a little bit off something you said midway through just now, is writing proves that things aren't about you, right? Like it's really easy to make a TikTok or an Instagram post that basically says, "Hey, look at how awesome my workout is, right? Look at how jacked I am. Look at how much weight I can lift." Um, that cannot and never had, those aren't T Nation stories. T Nation stories, and this is the thing. I think T Nation stories are about, this is how, like, you, the person reading this, can make your deadlift better. This is about how you, the person reading this, can get more out of your biceps workout. This is about you, it's always about you, the person reading this. And I think what writing does, and the great trainers who do writing understand this. The ones who don't do writing, because that's the interesting thing. When you exhume those DMs that come into me, and most of them are asking, can I want to write for you? And they almost always say, I have a great story. I can't, I really want to share with people. I'm like, nobody cares, not disrespectfully, nobody cares about your story. People care, and they're there to learn, and they're there because they want to get better and they want to get in shape. I don't lead off any personal training session I have by telling anybody my life story. I tell them how they're going to get jacked, or how they're going to lose weight, or how they're going to improve their performance. And that's what people want. And when you write, you're forced to think about the person on the other end to like this nth level. And that's what makes you a great writer. And the funny thing is that will eventually translate to better content too. Because if you can get in the mode to write for somebody else and not necessarily write about your amazing journey or anything like that, you're going to eventually be able to translate that back into really, really good content across mediums.
I use the same phrase, the same wording. And you're right.
Yeah.
It sounds blunt and almost harsh, but absorb the lesson. It's true. People really don't care about your story. Your story is not necessarily that interesting. If you do a lot of other things really well, you may eventually develop, brand following, dedicated, loyal people who then become very interested in aspects of it. But virtually all of the media you're going to create is going to be of service to the other person. And it's very easy for people in your position and mine to see who's all about them, who really just wants attention, who wants to gain vanity metrics of social media status, and who really is there as an authentic person who is serving and helping other people. And there's a big difference, and there's usually a lot of easy to spot flags. Now, another thing that I really wanted to ask you, almost more than any other person that I train or that I've had on the podcast, like outside your own training, how do you stay grounded and in touch with training and coaching, given the fact, and relating maybe to the trainer on the gym floor or the client, because you're the fitness director of Men's Health and you have a very large following that you're serving that way. So what keeps you grounded?
Hmm. Tough question because I definitely I think there are two main things. One is just the nature of the magazine and the kind of accountability that's built in to working with an ultra large publication with the platform that is Men's Health because I'm working with a lot of editors, photographers, designers, writers who, they're not all Andrew Coates. A lot of them don't know fitness. So very often I may have like an amazing thought that I want to convey that I could easily convey to you about, the perfect angle for the eccentric contraction of my biceps femoris. I'm just making up stuff, but you get where I'm going. And I literally can't talk that way because I'm not talking to that same person. So I think working among regular people who are very, very talented at helping with storytelling in other ways and telling stories to the general public keeps me really, really grounded and forces me to just think a little bit about how I'm delivering the message and making sure that and to make sure that that message is not just delivered, to all my nerdy trainer friends, but it also works for the general public. So I think that's one thing, and it's great too because those people very often, I can have a brilliant fitness idea that doesn't make any sense to them, and they'll knock me down a peg and say, "Yeah, that's great for the person who's trying to add another half inch to their 40-inch biceps, but that's not going to work for anybody else." And then suddenly I got to go back to the drawing board. So I think that accountability is really, really big. The other thing is, the working with a media brand like that is very, very challenging because we have very, very high, we have a lot of challenges, right? We have a lot of big numbers we have to meet. And because of that, I always have to be thoughtful about how we're communicating to the general public. I think the other thing I try to do too is I don't train as many people now as I used to before I started at Men's Health. And a lot of that is because of bandwidth, because, building all that content, thinking about how we're delivering the content, etc. And also writing on the level that I need to takes a lot of time. But the one thing I've always tried to do is maintain at least four clients because I believe the way those clients are thinking, the way regular people think is something I always need to be plugged in with. So I need to always have somebody who I'm just programming for online, where I'm just sending them a monthly workout and they're doing it and hopefully keeping in touch with me and hopefully wanting to do more of that, right? I need to have somebody who I'm training virtually because that way that's one channel that we as trainers have, and I need to be plugged into that and see how that's going, right? And then I need to have somebody who I'm training in person, who's either coming to the garage or I'm meeting at a gym. That way, I'm working with those people. I'm constantly embedded with those people, and I see the problems that they're dealing with. I see how their perceptions of the fitness world have changed. I also see, to a lesser extent, how their injuries or their propensity for injuries has changed just based on lifestyle. So I feel like I try to always make sure to do that. And I think that because I have to constantly program for those three people, in addition to programming for the larger Men's Health audience, I kind of am able to keep a really, really good handle on not going crazy. I'll go crazy on my Instagram every so often, but I'm able to stay dialed into what I need to because of the clients I keep and the magazine I'm working for.
And listen to that, everybody, seriously. And I often will hit on this point. There are so many successful people, big brands, who still retain the work, quote, on the gym floor, or metaphorically speaking, right? Don Saldino is a great example of this. Yes, sure, he has a very, very exclusive clientele now that he deals with one-on-one, including Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, obviously he's famous for. But if you watch Don's media, he will often have someone that comes to the barn for free that he oversees, just because he's able to give that time to that person. Luca, despite everything Luca's doing, all the public speaking, Luca still gets in and coaches classes. That's an essential part of Luca staying grounded in what he's doing. And I mean, how many other people? Kenny Santucci, again, at his gym, he is still there coaching people in real time. And yes, there are going to be people who will grow out of that space, but you'd be surprised at how many of these leaders and successful people that I know you guys look up to, and Lord knows I do, who are still practitioners. And so I think be very careful in the allure of getting away from being a practitioner.
Yeah, it's interesting too because you see some researchers out there now, and people who only there's a difference between the guy who only researches fitness and that's the science, and that's really, really important. But I think you need somebody who's working with people like the person who's working with people every day, or working with has some piece of on the floor, on the gym floor in their resume. That's the person who's going to eventually apply all that science anyway. So the research is important, but you can't necessarily just take, what people say on the studies. It's up to those of us on the floor to then apply that in useful ways. Because, for example, now I feel like the very big conversation you're seeing a lot of people talk about is the idea that we need to keeping tension on a muscle in the stretch position is really, really important. And that is
Right.
really useful. And we can apply that to our training. That might not necessarily work for or matter to the 65-year-old grandma who I'm going to train later. And so the on the floor aspect, I think, cannot be forgotten. We can talk about all the theory we want, but it still comes back to how are we going to benefit the person who we're serving?
And this, I've seen this a lot. This is a really good example. I saw Brett Contreras today put up a post, very, very detailed about he was calling out the men who criticize women's glute training, in particular things like the band work, because it's become this trendy thing to shit on some of these smaller, band isolation exercises that Brett in a very large way popularized. And we have to put into a box the fact that there's a strong sense of identity around Brett and these exercises. He's written a book on it. But he makes a really valid point that he goes on to explain how there are a lot of upper body isolation exercises that, based on the same logic, aren't as efficient as, a big press or a big row. And yet no one's questioning the guy who's doing the shoulder laterals or, any other number of arm isolation exercises, when in fact, with a lot of the glute training, especially the stuff that isn't in that loaded stretch position, I mean, it's sort of hypocritical the way some of these people are criticizing this. And I mean, again, I do not believe any single person, even the people I look up to the most in the industry, who I think are smart, are infallible with their philosophies towards training. And I like to draw from a lot of different resources. I do think that, as far as like glute training goes, Brett is probably one of the most credible people based on the sheer volume of experience and work he's done. And I've seen a lot of this philosophy and this brand building around the new wave of biomechanics. And I'm always a little bit suspicious when people are repackaging things, and especially if like a established group of PhDs. When you got Brett and when you got Mike Isertel and you got Pat Davidson, all basically contradicting what someone on the internet is saying on TikTok who doesn't have anywhere near the same educational credentials. Again, like I said, do I believe everybody's infallible? No. But if a group of them are all lining up and saying one thing, and someone who's building brand around some other thing is saying something else, I'm probably going to side with the educated authorities who also happen to be prolific practitioners as well. So
Yeah.
I think it's just having a thinking through a critical lens about all right, what's going on with what we're seeing on any form of media, but why are people saying this? And I think as well, like, I mean, I always consider myself to be evidence-based, but evidence-based also becomes this tribe where everything that doesn't get supported by a study, therefore, is has no value. And it's got to be a merger of the science, and it's got to be the art of coaching and understanding the individual. And I find that the best practitioners understand how to merge those two things. And it can't be, well, oh, it works for me, even though what you're claiming is pretty comfortably refuted by a big body of evidence, right? We see that more in nutrition than we do in necessarily in training.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because when I think about fitness, and I kind of when I see these studies and these debates, I think what it is we kind of have to understand that there's a little bit of a riddle and a challenge here, because the reality is most of the greatest moves that work, most of the greatest exercises that were ever done are not these spicy variations that anybody's doing. And to be honest, they're not the little booty band exercises
No.
either, right? Want to grow your glutes, squats, deadlifts, they worked years before Breckenridge or anybody came
Mhm.
along. I generally I tell this to a lot of young trainers, I tell this to a lot of people who I work with at Men's Health, and sometimes they don't want to listen, but all the best moves, all the greatest exercises, there is no best new exercise that's going to come out in 2023. All the greatest exercises were taken 2,000, 3,000 years ago. And that's just how it is. That said, and I think this is where kind of science meets practitioner a little bit. There's this thing with people, and I understand it, where all the greatest exercises were taken 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Push-ups, sit-ups, squats, lunges, go for a run, but we don't have great relationships with those things, for a variety of reasons. People hate pull-ups because of sixth grade, right? I hate push-ups because, or I hated push-ups for a long time because until I was 17 I couldn't do a single one and it was embarrassing, right? um and so I think what one of the things I've really learned at Men's Health is to sort of marry, the reality is the workouts I do are pretty basic. It's a lot of dumbbell presses, it's a lot of lunges, it's a lot of deadlifts. Um, and that works. And I'm doing the same workout for, months on end because I'm trying to milk it for results before I switch to something else. Because those are also my goals, right? The content game sort of deludes people into thinking you constantly need to change up your workout. You have to try this new exercise. You need to, variability is the key to success, right? um the fact that it deludes people into that is not a good thing. The thing I've learned gradually in Men's Health, and the thing I've come to respect, and I think it's underrated sometimes, among trainers who are too evidence based, and around trainers who are again a little bit focused on exactly what works, is that content that deludes people also excites them, and it can be a gateway into training for somebody who would have not done it because no, they have no interest in doing another dumbbell press or bench press or push up. But if I can give them a single arm alternating press and they're going to feel that and it feels different and new and exciting, maybe that's their gateway into fitness. And maybe the booty band exercises wind up being the gateway into fitness for somebody who wants bigger glutes, but is scared the heck out of squats and deadlifts for a whole host of reasons. So I think we kind of got to respect almost both ends, and kind of, I like to think of the influencer and that trainer who's never going to write for me at Men's Health because they don't have that knowledge, as a gateway tool that is going to help potentially excite somebody to want to get fit because they saw somebody do a bench press into a backflip, right? Meanwhile, that's going to open the door for them to get to the Andrew Coates story or the Don Saladino story or the Ebenezer Samuel story on Men's Health that can go a little bit more in depth and help them actually take things to the next level.
I used an analogy in the last episode with Michael Ranfone for anybody who's listening. It's people like to criticize Planet Fitness, right? And I think that's a foolish narrative. Yes, there are some low hanging fruit. You can say, well, there's a lot of people who aren't necessarily paying, or they don't, you're not allowed to drop weights or whatever. But you think about this: how many people are horribly intimidated by the the idea of stepping into a gym, in part because of some of the rubbish that does get shared on social media. And so maybe it's Planet Fitness's marketing, which is very, very big, get some of those boots in the door. Now, we know that not all those people will ultimately stay. And can we criticize Planet Fitness's ability to retain and help all those people? Listen, I worked in lots of gyms I worked at a couple of gyms, one commercial and obviously in a strength facility on contract now. And that old gym, I thought had a pretty decent culture, but it wasn't able to serve and help everybody. So I still think that there are going to be a certain number of people that self-select to and use a Planet Fitness is way better than nothing. There are going to be people who will try and fail, and eventually they will succeed. It's a gateway to it. And then there are going to be people that come to Planet Fitness, do really well, and decide, all right, this is limiting. I need something else. And the analogy I said is, if you own a facility, you want a Planet Fitness to open up next door to you, because that's not going to steal your members, or not very likely, especially if you're a higher end facility. But they're going to bring a lot of eyes on your facility, because people are going to be coming and going like, ooh, what's that? And then they're going to step in if they're serious and go, wait a minute, this is actually what I need. So I think that I love that you're right. There are a lot of people who I think are a bit performative on their social media. And I think there's a lot of weird, goofy information, especially in the nutrition space. But I think a lot of people who are really serious started out once upon a time subscribing to things that I think weren't super evidence-based. I mean, shit, if you go back far enough, I read Wheat Belly and thought, oh, gluten was bad and everybody needed to give it up. Like, I remember that. I don't even talk about that because it feels so far away from any sense of my identity now. But okay, piece of the puzzle along the way. I definitely grew up on bodybuilding magazines, and there's a lot of, I think, wonderful stuff in there, but there's also some stuff that I think we've gotten away from, like the meal frequency, the stoking the metabolic furnace, a lot of the old belief stuff, right? Like clean eating stuff. Things are more nuanced than that. But they were gateways that got me into the gym, kept me in the gym, and eventually led to a career in fitness. Okay. We're not going to save everybody, but I do think that these things are a net positive, as long as they're not predatory and willfully dangerous. So I love your philosophies in this. I really appreciate you coming on. We definitely want to have people go and follow you, know about you. And guys, don't immediately go in his DMs and go, hey, can I come write for Men's Health? But quite frankly, I will say this. If it's one of your aspirations, then ask yourself, what are the next steps you need to do about studying writing, which I teach a lot about. Maybe it's another publication that you submit to, you do the work, you learn the voice, you learn the style, the submission guidelines, and you earn that place with hard work. And it may put you in a position one day where you've built the skill and the connections to be able to get to write for Men's Health. So where do people find you on social media?
At Ebenezer Samuel 23, that's my Instagram. I have a TikTok that I can't remember, but you can find it at some point. And then the other big place is obviously menshealth.com. A lot of stories on there. We just did a really cool cover story with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which I got to train with the man. And then last place is we have a YouTube where we put a lot of our fitness content onto, especially our instructional fitness content. That's Men's Health Muscle. So check that out as well.
Yeah, everybody, I always say, if I'm bringing someone on here, it's a ringing endorsement of them, their media, what they're doing. And Eb is just someone I want everybody to know about, because, well, you're in a really powerful position in the industry to do a lot of good. So, and you've done a lot of good for me. Everybody listening, again, if you're a regular listener, go follow Eb. If you're someone who has found me and my podcast through Eb's media, and this is the first time you've heard, well, we've thrown around a few names. Don Saladino has been a previous guest. You got to scroll back a little bit. He's a good friend. Lee Boyce has been on a bunch of times. He's a very good friend of mine. He's a longtime Men's Health writer. There's a lot of other people in the industry that I believe you hold in very high esteem that you would enjoy, and maybe, just maybe, you'll stick around. And for the regulars, go share this with someone who you think it might help, because I'd love to see it grow. Thank you guys. I appreciate you.